It was bright yellow, the color of a highlighter, and for a long time it was one of the most common sights in any American mall, a shopping bag, with the words Forever 21 stamped down one side in a font you could pick out from clear across the food court. They went out the doors by the millions, swinging from the wrists of teenagers hauling home a weekend's worth of cheap, of-the-moment clothes. What almost no one ever noticed was the small print on the bottom. Turn one of those bags over, look down in the corner, and there in tiny black letters sat a single line, John 3:16, a Bible verse, maybe the most famous one there is. It was not a gimmick, and it was not an accident. The man who built Forever 21 ordered it printed on every bag the company ever made because he believed it. He had come to America with almost nothing and built an empire out of $5 dresses, and he wanted a small piece of his faith to ride home with every purchase. For 2 decades, that yellow bag was a fixture of growing up in this country. Today it is nearly a collector's item, because the company that printed it has now filed for bankruptcy. Not once, twice. The 2 bankruptcies sit 6 years apart, and at first glance they look like they have nothing to do with each other. The first one, back in 2019, came in a world where almost no one had heard the word Temu, and the app called Shein was barely a rumor. The second one, this year, arrived with both of those names splashed across every headline as the villains. 2 different eras, 2 different killers, supposedly, except it was the same company, dying of the same thing, both times. Forever 21 only ever had one real trick. It sold cheap, of-the-moment clothes faster, and out of bigger stores than just about anyone alive. It was a magnificent trick. It made its founders billionaires, and it carried inside it, from the very first day, the exact flaw that would go on to kill the company not once but twice. The man who built it stepped off a plane in Los Angeles in 1981 with a high school diploma, almost no English, and no money to speak of. His name was Do-Won Chang, though most people would come to call him Don. To get a foothold, he worked 3 jobs at the same time. He pumped gas at a service station, he mopped floors as a janitor, and he poured coffee at a shop, sometimes putting in close to 19 hours in a single day. His wife, Jin Suk, cut hair. Between them, they saved every dollar they could lay hands on. By 1984, they had put away around $11,000, and they bet all of it on a tiny store. It was 900 square feet, smaller than a lot of apartments, tucked into a stretch of Figueroa Street in the Highland Park neighborhood of LA. They called it Fashion 21. Don had noticed something simple while working the neighborhood. The clothing shop that did the best business was the one that put the newest styles on the rack the fastest. So that became the entire idea. Watch what was hot in the magazines and on the runways, make a cheap version of it right away, and get it out front while people still wanted it. It worked almost frighteningly well. That first little store pulled in around $700,000 in its first year. They soon renamed it Forever 21, partly to shed the idea that it was a shop for one community, and partly because the new name said exactly who the customer was meant to feel like. Forever 21, forever young, forever shopping. From there it became one of the great retail rockets of its time. Through the 90s and the 2000s, Forever 21 spread across the country and then across the world, one mall after another after another. The formula never changed. Runway looks at rock-bottom prices, fresh stock landing constantly, so there was always a reason to come back next weekend. At its absolute peak, in the middle of the 2010s, the company was ringing up around $4.4 billion in sales a year, running close to 800 stores spread across dozens of countries and employing tens of thousands of workers. The whole thing was still owned outright by Don and Jin Suk. They never took it public, never let an outside owner in, and for one shining stretch around 2015, that made the 2 of them worth an estimated $5.9 billion. A man who had pumped gas and a woman who had cut hair, now among the richest people in America. And that is exactly where the flaw began to surface, because there was only ever one way Forever 21 knew how to grow, and that was to get bigger. More stores, larger stores. The company became famous for the sheer size of its locations, cavernous places that could run well past 40,000 square feet, with the biggest of them stretching beyond 160,000, larger than a full department store. To feed that hunger for space, Forever 21 moved into the bodies of the dead. As older department store chains went under, It leased the giant empty boxes they left behind, the abandoned Sears and Mervyn's and Borders spaces, and turned them into enormous cathedrals of cheap fashion. For a while that looked like conquest. It was actually the trap closing. Those huge spaces came with huge, long-term leases, rent the company would owe for years no matter what happened next. Forever 21 was signing itself up for decade after decade of enormous mall rent at the precise moment the American mall was starting its long slide, and the crowds those stores were built to swallow were beginning to thin. At the same time, the company poured nearly everything into physical expansion and almost nothing into the place its own customers were quietly drifting toward, which was the internet. Forever 21's shopper was a teenager, and teenagers were among the first people on earth to start buying clothes on their phones. But the company stayed fixated on the store, on the square footage, on planting one more flag in one more country. By the middle of the 2010s, much of its overseas empire was hemorrhaging money, with international stores losing something on the order of $10 million a month. The machine had been built to do one thing, open more and bigger stores, and it could not stop doing that one thing even as the ground moved under every location it had. Newer rivals were simply sharper. Zara and H&M ran leaner, turned their stock even faster, and never chained themselves to department store-sized boxes in fading malls. Forever 21 had taught America to expect cheap and fast. Now other companies were doing cheap and fast better, and it was too big, too sprawling, and too deep in rent to turn the wheel. By the autumn of 2019, the bill came due. That September, Forever 21 filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that had looked unstoppable a few years earlier admitted it could no longer carry the thing it had built and announced it would close as many as 350 stores around the world. The easy story at the time pointed at online shopping, but the real wound was self-inflicted. Forever 21 had overexpanded, recklessly, into too many enormous stores under far too much long-term rent, and had bet the entire company on the shopping mall just as the mall began to empty. The first death was never really about the internet, it was about ambition with no brakes. The rescue is where the story turns genuinely strange. In early 2020, Forever 21 was bought out of bankruptcy for around $81 million, a shocking figure for a brand that had been throwing off billions only 5 years before. But look closely at who did the buying. The group that scooped it up was led by a brand licensing firm called Authentic Brands, and standing right beside them were two of the largest mall landlords in the entire country, Property Group and Brookfield. The company had just been dragged under, in large part by its ruinous mall leases, and it was rescued by the very mall owners it owed all that rent to. The logic was cold and simple. For those landlords, keeping Forever 21 alive was cheaper than watching hundreds of their biggest store spaces suddenly go dark all at once. So the brand survived, but it survived as something different. It was no longer a family's life's work. It was now a label, an asset sitting on a balance sheet, run by a holding company and propped up by its own landlords. If you have made it this far, you already understand that this was never really about cheap dresses. It is about how a thing that feels permanent can quietly stop being permanent, almost always from the inside, and almost always long before anyone says so out loud. Pulling those stories apart is the whole project here. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. Being owned by your landlords, it turned out, does not fix a broken idea. It only keeps the doors open while the world outside keeps moving. And after 2020, the world moved faster than Forever 21 ever had. For a few years, the new owners kept it running, hunting for some way to make the old magic work again. In 2023, in a move that tells you almost everything, the company struck a partnership with Shein, the Chinese fast fashion app that was busy eating its lunch, hoping to ride along with the very thing that was beating it. It changed almost nothing. The owners reshuffled their holdings, eventually folding the operating company into a larger retail group, but none of it touched the basic problem. Forever 21 had been the cheapest, fastest fashion in the mall. The cheapest, fastest fashion no longer lived in a mall at all. It lived on a phone. Romp. Shein and Temu had taken Forever 21's whole reason for existing and made it look slow. They carried no stores, no leases, no cavernous halls to light and heat and staff. They shipped almost unthinkably cheap clothes straight from overseas factories to a teenager's doorstep, at prices a store paying mall rent and import duties could never hope to match. And they had one more edge, a quiet one, written into the tax code. Under a rule called the de minimis exemption, packages mailed into the United States worth less than $800 came in with no import duties at all. Those overseas sellers were firing millions of tiny, cheap parcels straight at American doors, nearly all of them sliding in under that line, paying nothing in tariffs, while a company like Forever 21 paid duties on everything it brought in by the container to stock its shelves. When Forever 21 filed for bankruptcy the second time, in March of 2025, it said so plainly, in writing, in the court papers. One of its own restructuring officers stated that the company had been materially and negatively harmed by the way Shein and Temu used that exemption, that it had been undercut by rivals who simply did not have to pay what Forever 21 paid. This time there would be no surprise rescue by friendly landlords. The American operating company, running roughly 350 stores and employing more than 9,000 people, began shutting all of it down. By that spring, every Forever 21 in the United States was either closing or already dark. The yellow bags stopped crossing the counter for good, and yet, in the strangest way, Forever 21 is not entirely dead, and that is what sets this collapse apart from an ordinary funeral. The stores are gone, the company that ran them is gone, but the name itself lives on, because somewhere along the way the name and the company quietly became two separate things. The brand, the trademark, the logo. All of it is still owned by that licensing firm, Authentic Brands, and a logo cannot really go bankrupt the way a store full of people can. So Forever 21 is being switched back on as something thinner. It is returning as an online shop run by a different operator. Its locations in other countries, run by other licensees, never even stopped. There is talk of fresh stores in China and hints of new ones someday back here in America. But the thing that actually died is not coming back, whatever the logo does next. What died was the company America grew up with. The giant store at the end of the mall, the racks of $5 tops, the haul you carried out in that yellow bag with the verse hidden on the bottom, the family that built the whole thing from a gas station paycheck. What returns will be a name with new managers, licensed out to whoever can squeeze a dollar from the memory of it. The empire is gone. The brand is a tenant in its own name now, and the lesson it leaves behind is a hard one. If the only thing you are is the cheapest and the fastest, then you are alive exactly until someone shows up cheaper and faster, and there is always, eventually, someone cheaper and faster. So that is the autopsy. An immigrant couple turned $11,000 and a 900 square foot shop into a worldwide empire, grew too greedy with the square footage, and watched it fall the first time under its own weight, then a second time under something cheaper and quicker than it had ever been. 2 bankruptcies, 1 disease. What I want to know is what Forever 21 was to you. Was it the first place you ever bought your own clothes with your own money? The source of the whole weekend haul? The yellow bag shoved under your bed? And knowing now how it all came apart, who do you actually hold responsible for the ending? The founders who could not stop expanding, the landlords who turned it into a line on a spreadsheet, or the apps that finally underpriced it into the grave? And one more. Now that it is just a logo on a website, would you ever tap buy? Or did the real Forever 21 die with the last store? That is the one I am most curious about. Make your case in the comments.